The Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation proudly presents a celebration of reading made possible through the generosity of KPRC2, Phillips 66, and our many local supporters. Featuring best-selling authors Jean Becker, Gary Gulman, Brad Taylor, Dr. Ruth Simmons, and Chris Bohjalian.
Hello, I'm Keith Garvin. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Julie Baker-Fink, President and CEO of the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation. In this hour, we will share in-depth conversations with 5 best-selling authors, and we'll celebrate the power of reading.
Thank you, Keith. Literacy is connected to every facet of our community, including dropout, crime, unemployment, and tax rates, income disparities, and civic engagement levels. It also impacts health and healthcare costs. Low literacy perpetuates a cycle of inequality and poverty. By focusing on improving literacy rates in Houston, we can make a difference in the overall well-being of our community.
Literacy was the cause championed by First Lady Barbara Bush. Doro Bush Cook reflects on her mother's legacy.
When I was little, my fondest memories were of my mom reading aloud to us as children. I especially remember my mom reading Winnie the Pooh by A.A. Milne. In fact, I still have the book that she read from in my library, which I treasure very much. And also my parents modeled reading. They read all the time, and so we would see them reading interesting books. And so the value of reading was just early and often with my parents. And then when my kids would go to Maine, and all the grandkids would go, my mom would make sure that they did their summer reading before they went out to play. And I continue to encourage reading, even as adults, for my children. I give them Book of the Month Club for Christmas, and we do Jenna's Picks. We love Jenna's Picks. And we talk a lot about books and recommend them to each other. So reading is big in our family. My mom started the foundation, the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy, in 1989. And I think she would be most proud that we are continuing her mission, that we're fighting for people to have the literacy skills they need and deserve. And I think she'd be proud that the foundation is going strong. And I'm proud that she asked me to continue the work that she started 35 years ago. Mom chose literacy because she believed that if everybody could read, write, and comprehend, so many of the world's problems could be solved. She also believed that reading is a civil right and that literacy gives people the ability to navigate the world with dignity. The Barbara Bush Foundation has a national plan for adult literacy, and the wonderful thing is that we're connecting it with what goes on locally in Houston. Literacy continues to be a challenge. In fact, it continues to be a crisis. 130 million people in the United States struggle to put together basic sentences. So we still have work to do. But my hope is that in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, that number will be reduced and that people will be able to navigate society with dignity and take part in whatever they want to because they can read. I think my mom will be known as the First Lady of Literacy. For Mom, literacy was a passion. It just wasn't a passing cause. It was something that she committed her life to. In fact, up until the last day of my mom's life, she was working to move the needle on literacy. So I think when people think of literacy, they'll think of Barbara Bush.
Gary Gulman is one of the most popular touring comics, selling out venues nationwide, including Carnegie Hall.
His 5 comedy specials include The Great Depression and Gary Gulman, Born on Third Base, which was released on Max in December. He published his first book, Misfit, Growing Up Awkward in the 80s last year.
A product of Boston, Gary was previously a college football player, an accountant, and a high school teacher.
KPRC 2's Derek Shore sat down with Gary Gulman to find out what sparks his comic creativity and to discuss his struggle with mental health.
Gary, congratulations.
Thank you.
On your book. It's your first book, and the moment I picked it up, some names on the back cover jumped out at me. Amy Schumer, Judd Apatow, Seth Meyers, Ira Glass, who's the host of This American Life. You have a lot of fans out there,
yes,
famous and otherwise. Why did you decide that this was the right time to share your story?
Well, nobody had asked me before. I had just come out with a special on HBO that was about my recovery from this crippling depression that found me in the hospital for several weeks. And so I made this special, and it was well received. And then some publishers came to me and asked me if I had any ideas, and I said, well, I've always wanted to write a book chronicling my life from kindergarten through 12th grade, which I've always felt were the years that made me and built my my worldview, my philosophy, my sense of humor, but also provided me with enough trauma to really create off of and lose money in therapy. So they came to me. I had this idea, and it was a dream come true, because since I was a little kid, the thing that got me through a lot of my loneliness and boredom was reading. So I felt so honored to be able to become a part of this class of people who I had admired, writers and authors, since I was capable of understanding that somebody wrote the books that I was reading voraciously.
I think what appeals to me a lot about this book is you're not just highlighting all of the beautiful moments in life. You get into some really intense dark moments in your life, including marrying your wife Sade. Things are fine for a few months, and then suddenly, as you describe in the book, you are experiencing this crippling anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
Why was it important for you to share those really difficult times in the book?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think I felt an obligation when I started to feel well, and not just feel well, but to feel that I was reaching my potential in terms of how much I could enjoy my life, that I was what people call happy, that had been elusive for so long. I felt obligated to share a story of hope, and also the steps and the different treatments, including medicine and electroconvulsive therapy, which has gotten a horrible stigma because of a movie in the 1970s called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where Jack Nicholson is violently shocked, but that's not how it works. Yeah, and it's actually the gold standard of treating treatment-resistant depression. So I felt an obligation to share that story with people so that they could feel some hope, and it's been so beautiful to see people after my shows or hear from people in emails saying that because of my special and because of my openness about it, that they've gotten treatment, they've used either medicine or therapy or ECT or some of the other treatments that are available, and so that makes me feel very, very proud, and that I almost feel, I'm not an especially religious person, but I look at it as kind of a blessing.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Do you find that the book in some way is also potentially therapy, not just therapeutic for you in the process of writing it, but for those out there who are struggling with a really hard time? Maybe they've experienced deep depression and anxiety like you did. Yes. You're reaching a broader audience by writing this book.
Yes, I definitely think that what books always brought to me, and either memoirs or novels, was this understanding of what it was like to be in somebody else's shoes, and it's the basis of empathy and understanding and having compassion that I think novels and memoir and reading in general about other people's lives can bring you. And it never occurred to me that I was a person who people thought had it all. and that couldn't believe that somebody who had so much going for me, they would say, I never believed this, but that you had so much going for you and you were depressed made me feel less guilty about being depressed. A lot of people think that they can achieve their way out of feeling bad about themselves, and then I personally read a autobiography by Bruce Springsteen in which he talked about being so depressed he couldn't get out of bed, and I remember thinking, but you're Bruce Springsteen. Isn't that enough to make you feel good about yourself? But that's not how it works. It's biological, it's chemical, and it has nothing to do with your achievements. Elvis Presley famously was very depressed and troubled. So I think when people stop blaming themselves for feeling lousy and they understand it's not their fault, I think that's a very powerful and important lesson for people to understand.
I think so too. And you can understand why people would look at you and think, like, this guy has made it. You've been on massive shows, Last Comic Standing, Stephen Colbert, 2 HBO specials. Now you've written a book.
You can download a book of 400 pages in 8 seconds. Compare that to the delivery system I grew up with, the Scholastic Book Club.
Are there moments when you step back and you think of kindergarten age Gary and reflect on everything you have accomplished despite your struggles?
It's interesting because I think about these traumas in my life ruined me, but they also made me in that I was able to redeem them through stories and jokes, and so this suffering turned into something that was actually, it was almost alchemy, where I was able to turn this into comedic gold, I guess, and that I was able to make it funny. And so, was it worth it? I just wish it didn't last so long, but if it brings comfort to people, and that's what I think it has, then yes, I think it was worth it.
I think that's beautiful, that bringing comfort to other people is a priority for you.
I've come to a conclusion about our roles on Earth as trying to help each other get through this, no matter what it is. And it was something that of all the things that I've read in philosophy, Kurt Vonnegut's son said, we're here to help each other through this, whatever it is, and that really resonated with me, and so using my particular gifts of writing and jokes, I hope I can make it easier for people to get through this, whatever it is.
We'll get through it. We will. Gary, thank you so much.
This was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. You asked great questions.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Research shows that one of the single most impactful and actionable things that we can do to boost achievement levels and foster a love of reading is to increase the availability of books in the homes of underserved children.
The Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation has several initiatives, including My Home Library, which places books in the hands of children in need across our city. Research is clear. Providing children access to books in the homes is one of the most important and actionable things we can do as a community to increase reading achievement levels and foster a love of reading. In fact, research shows that children growing up in homes with books are on average 3 years ahead academically than children living in homes with few books.
3, 2, 1.
For this reason, we launched My Home Library in 2017. A program which empowers at-risk children with books to read, keep, and share. Thanks to the incredible support of the Houston community, we gifted our 1 millionth book through My Home Library program last year.
Justin will be receiving the 1 millionth book.
9 out of 10 of our more than 400 students are economically disadvantaged, and fewer than half met state reading standards in grades 3 through 5 last year. Increasing literacy rates is a key priority for our school. The My Home Library program is helping us generate excitement for reading among our students and create a culture of reading success at school and at home.
My collection is growing and I can't wait to dive into new adventures.
I chose Dark Moon for this. It's really funny.
This is my favorite book. I really like to read Pokemon stuff.
My favorite part is getting 6 books.
1 million is like a really, really big number. I think it is a bunch of zeros and just 1 1. 2 to 5,000 years? I would say it's a lot of books, and I think it would take you past your whole life to read them. 23 days? No, but I think I do have 1 million cousins. It's an honor to receive the 1 millionth book, and I wish there was 1 million ways to say thank you for making a difference.
In addition to the My Home Library program, our Young Professionals group places book boxes in low-income communities, and our Ladies for Literacy Guild has an initiative in partnership with Harris County Public Library called Curiosity Cruisers. They're a fleet of 4 mobile libraries that provide free books to children in their communities, as well as after-school and summer reading and STEM programming.
Brad Taylor is the New York Times bestselling author of the Pike Logan series. It's comprised of 18 books. He grew up in rural Texas and retired from the U.S. Army Infantry and Special Forces as a lieutenant colonel after 21 years of service.
Pierce Bush caught up with Brad Taylor for more insight on how his background influences his work as an author.
We're here with Greater Houston native Brad Taylor, graduate of Conroe High School. We're so honored to have you here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank
Great
you.
to be back. Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about your most recent book.
Sure.
Dead Man's Hand, 18th book in the series involving Pike Logan, this time hand-to-hand combat with some of Vladimir Putin's henchmen. What kind of research goes into a book like this?
Yeah, so this book is actually unique, and I don't ordinarily write about current events because they're current, and anything could happen in writing the book that just make it dead in the water. So I mean, the flash to bang on a book publication is about a year. So if you're writing about current events, you better be spot on when it's done, or you're in trouble. And I was doing research on Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, not because I was writing a novel, just because I still keep on top of all that. And one of the questions always everybody asks is, what's the red line for Putin to launch a nuclear missile? How's that going to happen? So I started looking at the red lines, and as I did the research, I came upon this system called the perimeter system, which I'd never heard of. And it's like prehistoric Generation 1 artificial intelligence. And it came about because it's been there forever, since USSR. It came about because of President Reagan, the SDI initiative, Strategic Defense Initiative, the old Star Wars thing, where he said we can knock out every missile that comes into the United States. I've got this shield now. And that scared the heck out of Russia because at that time, the deterrence was mutually assured destruction, MAD. Nobody would start the war because they're both going to end up dying. So that kept everybody from firing. And the USSR said, well, if America thinks they can knock every missile out, that kind of defeats the MAD doctrine because they'll think they can launch a first strike. And they were thinking that we'll do the first strike. They're going to do a first strike on us. We're not going to be able to prevent it. So they created this perimeter system, which was known as the dead hand in NATO. And what it was a bunch of sensors all over Russia, so of all different types. So they had seismic sensors for earthquake activity, communication sensors for is the Kremlin talking to high command, all these sensors. And if all of them triggered, if everything was met, it all fed into a computer, and the computer determined that a first strike had occurred, and then it would launch its missiles, which is why it was known as the dead hand. Nobody was in charge of the missiles. Well, that system's still in Russia. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And I was like, man, there's a story there. So I said, that's the story I'm going to write about. And once I get the plot going, then I'd like to get on the ground. I wasn't going to go get shot at in Ukraine, and I've already written about Russia in one book. I certainly wasn't going to end up in Russia. So we looked around, and I said, we'll go up around the Baltic region. We ended up going to Denmark, to Sweden, Finland, and Estonia, because I like to get on the ground. I wish I could write a book like some people can just by looking at Google Earth. But there's always, I like to say there's 50% I'm looking for. I mean, I go with a list, here's what I'm looking for. And there's 50% looking for me. And I don't even know it exists, but when I get on the ground and see it, then I'll use it.
So you graduate Conroe High School here in the Houston area. You go to the University of Texas. You join the ROTC program. Yeah. You serve our country for 21 years in the Special Forces, becoming a lieutenant colonel. Was that your? What led you to becoming an author out of curiosity? Yeah. And how does your military experience really impact your books and your work?
Sure. I've always been a voracious reader. I had no intention of being an actual writer, as in, I'm going to make money being a writer. But I always had in the back of my head that I was going to write a novel. Just one day I was going to write a novel. And I was in a special mission unit at Fort Bragg, it's now Fort Liberty. And I took a break and I was teaching at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. And I had a lot of time on my hands. And I told my wife one day, I'm going to write a book. And she said, okay, whatever you want. And that's how I got into writing, I was just writing a story for myself. I was just going to write what I like to read. I didn't try to search out anything like that. What is a public one? I'm just like, I'm going to write my own book. And then, surprisingly enough, it sold. And so I decided to retire from the military and start writing a try. And my experiences in the military, there's nothing in any of my books that I've actually done on the ground, because a lot of it's classified. In fact, the organization itself, I didn't want anybody to say that I was writing about real world units and just changing the name and calling it fiction. So I created this, I call it the task force, Project Prometheus, that's completely fiction. If anybody had ever worked in this world, they would say nobody actually does it that way. And it's a combination of fusion of intelligence assets and direct action units and things like that. We all used to kind of fantasize about it. We all say, man, it'd be really neat if we had something like that, but we don't. Having said that, because of my experience, I knew if we did design something like that, there would be left and right limits. It wouldn't be allowed to run amok. They would have all these controls, and it's because of my experience that I was able to craft that. People ask me, are you Pike Logan? And it's like, no, I'm not Pike Logan. Usually what I say is that it's kind of like the PGA Tour. There's probably 1% of the earth that can play on the PGA Tour. There's a guy who's 100th on the money list nobody's ever heard of. Well, that's me. And there's Tiger Woods, and that's Pike Logan. Now, I'm on the PGA Tour. I mean, I did all the special operations training and everything else, but I'm not Pike Logan.
Was your first book accepted immediately? How did you sell it?
You
wrote it for yourself, it sounds like, but how did you actually get it published?
So I went the long-winded route of, I just started submitting it to people and seeing what they thought of it. And that, in the back of my head, I guess you kind of thought, let's see if this is going to sell. I didn't really think it ever would, but, you don't win the lottery without buying a ticket, so I sent it in. And eventually an agent picked it up, and then the agent sold it to a publisher.
You lovingly call your wife Elaine, who's here, also a UT graduate, where it sounds like you guys met, the deputy commander of everything.
Yes.
Talk about her role in your experience working together, because I guess she helps you.
She absolutely helps me. So she was a media analyst for the longest time. She had her own job and her own career and everything. And I started writing 2 books a year. And so I had a lot on my plate. Especially with the new world, social media, websites, book research trips, everything we were doing, she handles all of that. She does everything except write the book. And she's also my first reader, so she reads the book. As soon as I write something, she'll read it immediately, chapter by chapter. And a lot of times it's a great help, because I'm writing for the general audience, and when I get too technical on something, I read it and it reads perfectly fine to me. She'll read it and say, I don't understand what this is going on here. And so that helps me do it. But other than that, she does just about everything outside of writing a book.
So, obviously, Dead Man's Hand, most recent work. What's next for you, Brad?
We actually came back from a book research trip from India. And the next book I'm working on right now is about the gray zone of warfare, short of actual bullets flying between India, China, and the United States.
Wow. Brad Taylor, native Houstonian, so grateful that you're here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for all you do. Thank you for your service to our country, too.
Thank you.
Neil Bush is continuing his mother's mission right here in Houston. Neil and his wife Maria founded the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation a decade ago.
And there's lots of work to do. Fewer than half of Houston ISD's 3rd to 8th graders met or exceeded grade level standards last year on reading, as measured by the state's assessment. Here, Neil talks about our progress and the impact you are helping us to make in Houston.
My mother, Barbara Bush, had a real passion for literacy, and it was driven by the core fact that if you can't read at an age-appropriate level, you can't possibly realize your fullest God-given potential. My mother started the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation under Maria and my leadership to try to address Houston's literacy crisis. As individuals become literate, our society will become better for it, and so it's really critical to the Houston community that everyone be able to read at his or her fullest potential. The best thing we ever did as a foundation was hire Julie Baker Fink as our leader. She's an amazing leader, and programmatically, Julie has led the foundation to forming programs that are making a huge difference in the community. We developed a blueprint for community action after identifying Houston's literacy crisis, and now to meet that blueprint, to kind of fulfill the blueprint. We've got programmatic and activities, and we support community work. I'm really extremely proud of some of the programming. I'll give you an example. The My Home Library achieved this incredible milestone of 1 million books have been distributed to kids who for the first time in their lives have been able to select six books of their choice that they can take home to form their own little My Home Library. And it's a phenomenal program to go into kind of high-risk public schools and to allow children to select books to take home has been a great success. This is a remarkable year. This year would have marked my father's 100th birthday. And I'm so proud of the legacy of supporting volunteerism that he's had throughout his entire career as a young professional himself. And then in his post-presidency, when he was in the White House, he started Points of Light and has encouraged all Americans to find just anything you can do, small or large, to make a difference in the lives of others. I would urge people that watch this show to consider being a mentor or a reader, stepping into the life of a kid, especially kids that are in an underprivileged, environment where they don't have books at home, where they're not hearing vocabulary words at home. Help intervene in those lives to help kids become readers at an early age, which would give them a better shot at success in getting out of poverty and living a full and prosperous life. So be a volunteer, help a kid read. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, I hope Houston stands out as being a city that really took literacy seriously, that we brought all the stakeholders together to make it a priority, and our city literacy rates will be much higher than other urban communities. My mom would be extremely proud that the foundation is carrying on her legacy and having a real impact in the lives of individuals and ultimately in the life and the health of the Houston community.
From her impoverished childhood in Houston's 5th Ward to her historic appointment as first African American to serve as president of an Ivy League school at Brown University, Dr. Ruth Simmons is a force to be reckoned with. As Dr. Simmons tells KPRC2's Candace Burns, education and a love of reading were the keys to her success.
Dr. Simmons, thank you so much for joining us. We are excited to talk about your book. Can you read a portion of it for us?
Thank you for having me. This is from the prologue. I was born to be someone else. Someone, that is, whose life is defined principally by race, segregation, and poverty. As a young child marked by the sharecropping fate of my parents and the culture that predominated in East Texas in the 1940s and 50s, I initially saw these factors as limiting what I could do and who I could become. That in the end, I did not become the person I was born to be, still, at times, confuses and perplexes me. Throughout my 70-plus years, I've been struggling to understand why the early circumstances of my life did not, in the end, define me. I've now come to realize that I have become the person I am today, rather than the person I expected to be, because of the people I knew when I was young, my family, my teachers, my community. They intercepted my modest expectations, boosted my confidence the future could be different, and sent me on my way with all the support they could muster.
That's beautiful. I have had the pleasure of reading your book, and I want to let you know that it is incredibly inspiring. So what role did books and literature play in your life?
Well, books were everything for me as a child. And keep in mind that when I was living on a sharecropper's farm, we had no books. We had no learning utensils. We had nothing. And so it was only when I went to school that I was introduced to books. And then when I moved to Houston, there was a center nearby, a community center with a library. And I could walk up the street to a library and borrow books. And then something extraordinary happened to me. This closed world that I was a part of and that I thought would be the constraints of my life really dropped away as I began to see how other people lived. Some imagined, of course, in fiction, but I understood that there was a different world from the one that I had become familiar with. And as soon as I began to understand that I couldn't go to downtown Houston, but I could go to other countries. I could go and meet other people. I couldn't associate with whites, but I could meet them in books and so forth. So what books meant to me is the ability to open a world that otherwise would not have been available to me.
So in your book, you talk about people who influenced and mentored you on your journey. Was there a particular person or a defining moment that you feel was a catalyst in your pathway of success?
Well, there's so many, honestly, but the first time I walked into school, still in Grapeland, was an unforgettable day for me. Honestly, I don't know if you feel that way about your first day of school, or if you remember.
Not the
you
way
don't.
that you remember
okay.
yours.
Well, I mean, I can't forget it because I'm the youngest of 12. I don't matter very much. I'm the lowest on the totem pole. I'm ugly. I'm wearing tatters, like any farm girl from that era. And I go into this school, and this teacher reacts in a way that shocks and gratifies me, and that is she says hello to me, she welcomes me as if I'm somebody, as if I really matter, and as if I'm a beautiful human being, a beautiful and valued human being. And she speaks so sweetly and in this way that I think, oh my God, I mean, it's not like being at home where I'm, lowest on the totem pole, and I don't know anything. I'm not a very valuable member of my family. And then here I am in school, and my teacher is saying, you're wonderful. Not only that, but you can be an exceptional student. And everything that I did in school was wonderful. Okay.
Praise, yeah.
praise, and so forth. So that was unforgettable. And I think because of that experience, I was prepared for every year after that to look for that kind of experience in school. In my life, what I've tried to remember always is to be fully who I am. I do not deny the poverty in which I grew up. I do not deny the circumstances of my life. I do not deny the things in my life that have been good or things that have been bad. And so I'm proudest probably of the fact that I have not changed in all the years and all the things that I've been through. I've never wanted to change in order to be successful, in order to be respected, in order to be thought of as somebody important. And that's what I want every young person to understand, that who you are is enough. You just need to find ways to bring out the essence of that.
There are many children and young adults across Houston, particularly children of poverty and color, who read below grade level. We've done so many stories on that. And they don't have access to high quality education or adequate resources. What can we do as a community to ensure that more children dream big and can achieve success?
This is so important. It's important in our community. It's important for the whole country. It's important for the whole world. So the first thing is that we've got to make sure that every parent understands the importance of facilitating that child's path and the good that they're going to accomplish by focusing on school, by learning, and so forth. We've got to make sure parents understand, because parents don't always understand that, understand what a difference that makes when they are supportive rather than critical, when they are go out of their way to learn what they can do, to work in concert with the school. That's critical. But beyond parents, communities raise children too. And when I think about my own experience and the fact that there were so many people around who intercepted my path, I always say to people, no matter what you're doing, if you're volunteering, if you are walking down the street and you're seeing a child, doesn't matter what you're doing, every opportunity you have to encourage a child to work hard, to be serious about learning, and to expect that if they do that, there is an incredible world waiting for them. So volunteers can have a big impact. Teachers certainly do. Churches and religious establishments do. Everybody is responsible for that child that they encounter.
It takes a village.
It takes a village.
Dr. Simmons, you are so inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing your life and your story in that book. We really appreciate you and your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Barbara Bush was an advocate for family literacy and believed that parents are their child's first and most important teachers.
A baby's brain doubles in size during the first year of life and is more than 85% developed by age 5. Reading aloud to and engaging with their baby is one of the most important things parents can do to support healthy brain development and early learning.
White dog, what do you see? I see a black sheep looking at Syed.
This is Syed. He's 2 weeks old. Before we left the hospital with him, our nurse at HCA Houston Healthcare West spoke with us about the value of reading and talking to him every day.
Black sheep.
She also gave Syed his very first book. We didn't know reading books while he is just a baby was so important, and he'll be learning so quickly. He's so tiny.
Nearly 85% of brain development occurs during the first 3 years of life. What parents and caregivers do with their infants and toddlers during this time to help their brains make connections and foster oral language development is critically important. In fact, it serves as a foundation for all future learning. That's why the partnership with the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation on Raising a Reader is significant. By working together, our nurses are providing information and books to new mothers and helping them understand that caring for their child extends beyond physical health.
We strive to ensure mothers leave the hospital with the knowledge and resources they need to care for their newborns. Encouraging and equipping parents to embrace small yet impactful activities such as reading, talking, and singing has been rewarding. These simple things will help moms and dads build a strong bond with their babies and nurture their little ones' developing mind.
The new mothers have been very receptive to the resources we provide, and they leave with a better understanding about why reading books and engaging with their babies are essential everyday activities.
We want the best for Syed, and we have been reading and talking with him a lot since he was born 2 weeks ago. We know reading to him will make a difference, and it makes me very happy. We are grateful the Raising a Reader program was created so parents know how to do the right things to help our children. I'll be a better dad, and Fabia will be a better mom for sure, and Syed will have a better life because we will read to him every day.
Through programs like Raising a Reader, we can help families support early learning success and give thousands of babies like Syed the great healthy start in life they deserve, setting them on a path to a bright future.
We are excited to be partnering with HCA Houston Healthcare to expand the Raising a Reader program not only to West and Clear Lake hospitals, but also to the Women's Hospital of Texas. We expect to serve 11,000 new parents and babies by the end of this year and approximately 37,000 in 2025 and 2026 through our incredible partnership.
Next, Lauren Bush Lauren introduces us to Chris Bohjalian. He is the New York Times bestselling author of 24 books, 3 of which have been made into movies.
And his book, The Flight Attendant, is an Emmy Award-winning series on Max starring Kaylee Cuoco. Chris Bohjalian's latest book, The Princess of Las Vegas, was released in March.
Hi, so thrilled to be here with Chris Bohjalian and the author of the latest and greatest, The Princess of Las Vegas. I have not read this yet. I know it's hot off the press, so excited to dig in. Let's start there. Tell us about your new book.
The Princess of Las Vegas is about 2 sisters, damaged, wounded, but incredibly strong. One is a Princess Diana impersonator in a tribute show.
Here.
Yes.
Yeah.
At a Las Vegas casino. And so while it is set in Vegas, that fiery meteorite that shoots across the night sky for all of us, and while it has crime and casinos and a couple of corpses, fundamentally for me it's always a book about family and sisters, and is a city, even one as big as Las Vegas, big enough for these 2 sisters and all the trauma they've endured. I view The Princess of Las Vegas almost as the TV series Hacks meets the TV series The Crown. But then I depend on my characters to take me by the hand and lead me through the dark of the story. And a book like The Princess of Las Vegas, I couldn't keep up with history. When I finished the book in early 2022, my mobsters were all Russian oligarchs. But then Putin invades Ukraine, and all of a sudden these Russian oligarch jokes didn't work. They were really falling flat. So I changed the gangsters, I changed the mob, and I think we're set. And I've got a finished book in August of 2022, and then Queen Elizabeth dies. And suddenly I need to change it again. And one of the MacGuffins in this book is cryptocurrency. Somebody wants to bring crypto to the casino floors, and well, then there's the FTX crypto scandal.
Lots of current events got in the way of you completing this one, it sounds like.
It did, and so that's when I made the decision. This book is set firmly in August and September of 2022, just so that history can't keep cutting my legs out from underneath me.
I'm sure your editor was like, just let's finish this.
Yes, Doubleday was thrilled when I put a line in the sand. August, September 2022, that's when the book is set.
And how long does it take you typically to write a book? Does it vary depending on the book, or do you have a general, is it down to a science now for you?
You know, I've published 24 books. My 25th comes out in March of 2025.
Okay.
3 plays, close to 1 million words of newspaper columns and journalism. It still takes me about a year to write a rough draft of a book. And then maybe 6 to 9 months to edit it and get it right. The goal is to write 1,000 words every day. I don't always write 1,000 words, but that's the goal because it is, trust me, a whole lot easier to edit garbage than a blank page.
Yeah. You have to start somewhere. Well,
You
that's
do.
inspiring, yeah. And so many of your books, I definitely saw The Flight Attendant and loved it, have become movies or TV series, Emmy Award winning, The Flight Attendant. So what is it like an author to work with producers and directors to turn your vision, your story, your characters, into something on the screen?
I love television, and I love movies, and we are in a golden age of television. And I don't precisely write my books hoping they will be adapted, but TV has begun to influence my books. Going back to The Sopranos, Mad Men, The Americans, all of these great TV shows about dread. I love them. And my books are about dread, and so as I fell in love with streaming television, I allowed myself to lean into dread even more. And so while my books are still fundamentally about character, and can we rise to the problems before us, I have allowed TV to infiltrate my soul and what I put on the page in a big way. So I loved The Flight Attendant, I loved Midwives, Secrets of Eden, Past the Bleachers, and it would be an exaggeration to say that I work with the writers or the producers. Most of the time my principal contribution is staying out of the way on the set in the Video Village and knowing when it is okay for me to get up from my quote unquote director's chair and get coffee or bagels.
Okay. So you are you there on set generally sometimes to help guide character development, etc.? Or once you hand it over to the folks making the show, it's a bit of like a trust situation and it's in their hands?
That is really well put. It is a trust situation. I write the book, I turn it over to them, and they make magic. I usually visit the set a bit. It varies. The flight attendant had to stop filming because of the COVID pandemic. And when it resumed filming, they had really smart, safe COVID protocols in place. So I only visited the set during season 1. And I only visited the set when they were filming in New York. I didn't join them in Bangkok. I didn't join them in Italy. I let them work their magic because they know what they're doing.
Yeah. How exciting.
It is.
What a thrill. I mean, yeah, you've had 24 books, many of them #1 New York Times bestseller list. Like, did you ever think when you set out to be a writer, we were talking about your origins of that journey, that you would have such incredible success and have so many fans and readers and now viewers viewing your stories that you've dreamed up?
I didn't, but I think it's important to note that my wife did. There were points in the mid-1990s, after I'd left my first career in advertising to be a full-time writer, when it looked pretty bleak. There was 1 month when my wife and I sold all of our dining room furniture so we could pay the mortgage.
Wow.
There was another month when we have a newborn baby and we sell all of our living room furniture so we can have health insurance. And I remember once saying to my wife, "Did you ever think we'd be okay?" And she said, "Oh, I never doubted it. I had complete faith in you."
That's
so that
awesome.
Even when I really wondered whether I was making one cataclysmically bad decision after another, the kinds of decisions that so many of my characters make in my books, really bad decisions. I love looking back and knowing that my wife never doubted me.
That's awesome. Very inspiring.
Thank you.
Well, so nice to meet you. Thank you
great
for
to
being
meet
here in Houston for the celebration of reading. I know my grandmother is looking down from above and is very proud of this gathering.
Oh, I am so thrilled to be here. I will move heaven and earth to support a foundation like this that supports literacy and gets books into the hands of so many kids and adults. It's just a gift.
It's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jean Becker served as Chief of Staff for President George H.W. Bush for nearly 25 years. Prior to that, she served as Deputy Press Secretary for First Lady Barbara Bush and was a newspaper reporter for 10 years, including a 4-year stint at USA Today.
She is the author of New York Times bestseller, The Man I Knew, the amazing story of George H.W. Bush's post-presidency. Her latest book, Character Matters, and Other Life Lessons from George Herbert Walker Bush, was released in April.
KPRC 2's Frank Billingsley caught up with Jean Becker in President Bush's former Houston office to discuss why character matters.
I am here, honored to be here, in the last office of President George Bush, his Houston office, with Jean Becker. This first, Jean, before we get to you, this is really something. This is a beautiful office on the 9th floor, an amazing downtown view. George Bush loved this office.
He absolutely loved this office, and he traveled a lot in his post-presidency. But when he was in town, he would get here about 7 o'clock in the morning. He would come in, he would walk in, and he would have had 4 cups of coffee and would have read 3 newspapers. I would try to get here first, and he would open the front door and say, "Top of the morning, Jean. It's going to be a great day." And we off and running we would be.
That's wonderful. You knew him for how long?
Well, I first met him when I was a newspaper reporter for USA Today. I covered the 1988 campaign. But I came to Houston after he lost the election. I worked for Barbara Bush in the White House in her press office. And she asked me to come to Houston to help her with her memoirs. And about the time I was done with her memoirs, his first post-White House Chief of Staff retired. She told him she was going to retire after 1 year. And he asked me, he called me into this office. I sat in one of these chairs, and he said, "Barbara thinks that you could maybe fill in. I need to hire a new chief of staff. I don't know who to hire. Would you be willing to keep the seat warm?" This would have been March of '94. And Frank, I said to him,
I don't know how to be a chief of staff. I was a writer and a press person. I said, I've never been anyone's boss. I've never done a budget. I can't be your chief of staff. He says, you know what? We'll make it up as we go. I promise you I will hire someone by Labor Day. We never talked about it again.
That was that.
That was that.
So this is it's a wonderful book. I have to tell you, when I first saw the title, Character Matters and Other Life Lessons from George H.W. Bush, I thought, well, this is probably going to be more of a eulogy of all of his pals. But it's not that at all. It is memories and stories, funny, sad, hilarious, and they really weave out what it was like as president. I mean, you've done a marvelous job of taking the right information and showing us what he was like as president, as well as a man and a human. But it's a bit of a history lesson here.
It really is, and that was the challenge. When my editor asked me to write this book, the book wasn't my idea, and I wish I could say it was, because it's a brilliant idea. And the timing of it is, you can't make it up. That this book, Character Matters, is coming out at this time in our country. But my editor felt that we had something more to learn from President Bush, and he wanted me to write a book about life lessons from him. And so what I did is I reached out to the people who knew him the best, and my challenge, though, was I want you to tell a story. I want specific examples. I didn't want them just waxing eloquently about what they thought of George Bush. And they did a great job. I am very grateful to the contributors in this book. I'm the narrator. They're the ones who tell the story.
So how did you pick, I mean, did you just go through a Rolodex? How did you get all these people?
That's a great question. So I did definitely target a few people who I knew I wanted to be in the book. I reached out to former Prime Minister John Major of Great Britain, former Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, who of course has died a couple months ago. I knew they're his only head of state peers who are left. And then I reached out to Vice President Dick Cheney specifically to write about Desert Storm, because he was Secretary of Defense then. There were certain people, friends, who are colleagues, who I needed to tell very specific stories. Former Senator Rob Portman tells the story of the 1990 budget deal. But then, when I got them lined up, I reached out to President Clinton and asked him. I also reached out to Nancy Pelosi. They were big friends. And I wanted this book to be very nonpartisan. So I have an email blast of 600 Bush family and friends that I started when they were still alive. It was sort of my way of updating people on what's going on in their life, what was going on in their life. It's still active today. I still send them, news about the library and the Barbara Bush Foundation, etc. So I sent out an email to about 600 people and said, I'm doing this book. If you have a story, talk to me. Oh my God, my email.
1,200 emails back?
Well, there's 156 contributors to the book, but two of the people on my email, well, there's a lot of interesting people on the email. One is Reba McEntire, and the other is Dana Carvey, and they both emailed me and said, yeah, we have a great story. Would you like to hear my story? And I was like, okay.
Well,
yes,
I was
I would.
What was the most surprising response? That was probably those two were right in line.
Probably theirs.
Yeah.
Probably theirs, because it's just,
out
of the blue. And they're like, yes, we have a story we would like to tell. If you would like to hear it. Yes, I would.
Yes, I would. Tell me something you learned you didn't know.
Okay, so here's the main thing I learned that surprised me. I was his chief of staff for 25 years, and I knew how he treated me. He treated me with great respect. I knew that he listened to me. I knew that he respected my opinion. And I never really thought about it that I was a woman who was his chief of staff. Starting with Condi Rice's story, in the very first chapter, Condi writes an amazing story when she went to work in his White House for Brent Scowcroft in the National Security Office. She was a young Black woman who came out of Stanford, not well known in foreign policy circles at all. She was a Sovietologist, I think is the term. And they hired her to come be their expert on the Soviet Union. And with President Bush's first meeting at Malta with Mikhail Gorbachev, he motioned Condi over. Secretary Baker, his Secretary of State, was there, Brent Scowcroft, his National Security Advisor, who are his two main and trusted confidants, of course. But he motioned Condi over and he introduced her to Gorbachev. And Condi says in the book he did it very deliberately. I think she even says he did it loudly and made the point in front of his national security team, in front of his team. This is the woman who I listen to when it comes to the Soviet Union. And the point that Condi makes is that is how you empower a young Black woman. You don't just talk the talk, you walk the walk. It's such a great essay.
I know the whole book is really something. Is there one that you just think, oh, that is the hook pin, that is the story that is the go-to?
One of my, and I've been quoting it a lot, former Texas Speaker of the House, Joe Strauss, wrote an amazing essay about, it's a tough essay, about how politics were when President Bush was in Washington and how he could reach across the aisle, how people knew how to agree to disagree. He really takes current politicians to task for their behavior. And he says it is possible to have a political discussion without being demeaning, without calling people names. His essay is really powerful. And Vice President Quayle wrote the epilogue, and he really brings it home, because he sort of makes the same point too, in that I'm putting words into his mouth, but he basically says we need to clean our act up. This is what leadership was, and we can do this again.
Because character matters.
Mm-hmm. Character matters.
We hope you've enjoyed hearing from our featured authors and learning more about the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation's outreach in our community.
One of our key priorities is to ensure that every child in Houston reads at or above grade level by the end of the 3rd grade. This is crucial because a child who does not read proficiently by the end of the 3rd grade is 4 times more likely to become a high school dropout. We need your help to reach our city's youngest and most vulnerable children and prepare them for a bright future.
Go to barbarabushhouston.org to learn more about the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation and to explore ways you can get involved. And thank you for joining us for a celebration of reading.